The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Well, hello. How's it going out there? Good evening, and I hope you are doing very well. This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews, and we are back for another reading. We are continuing. This is our second week reading The Fabian Freeway by Rose L. Martin, a 1966 historical epic about the tiny group of bored atheists who hatched a plot to take over the world. And that might sound incredible, and you might be incredulous at hearing me say that, and so you should be, which is why we have to dive into the book, look at the evidence, read it and assess it and weigh it up for ourselves and make up our own minds. Because remember, the key to all of this, when you're trying to figure out what's going on in the world and how we got to where we are going and how we can steer things in a better direction for the future, the key is to question everything, always. Don't take anything at face value. Don't believe anything I say. Check it all out for yourself. And the best way to do that is to get into the books, read the pages, read the lines on the page, and then you can read between the lines. But you have to read the lines first to read between the lines. You get that kind of a metaphor? Does that make sense? So welcome. I'm really happy to have you here today. If you're tuning in live, if you're not tuning in live, then I'm really happy to have you here also. And as I always forget to say, if you're watching this on the replay, check out the pinned comment underneath the video to see the timestamps if you'd want to jump straight ahead to the actual reading of the book. But if you're here live, you just got to persevere and put up with me rambling on for a little bit before we get to the actual book. So good evening to all those in the YouTube chat. We got Frank, Heidi, Adam, CESP, Gwen, and Richard, and Amanda, and LJ. What a team. What a dream team. Fantastic. So happy to have you all here. A bit of chat talking about the fantastic weather that we've been having. It's true. I've been out in the sunshine today. In fact, I'm running a little bit late tonight because I was over at a barbecue with family celebrating a birthday, and it was hard to tear myself away, but I had to because we had a 7 o'clock broadcast time and I had to honor that. And but I was pretty close to just not showing up because sunshine and food and good energy and good people and good vibes, but I'm here and I'm so glad I am because you're here too, and that makes it all worthwhile, and that's what it's all about. So thank you again for being here. I know it's hopefully somebody's enjoying the sunshine and listening at the same time. I don't get to do both. I have to be here in this dark room with the curtains shut for the broadcast. But hopefully you out there can still enjoy a bit of sunshine and soak up that good energy from the sun. There's been some strange things happening overnight. We've been seeing strange colors and lights in the sky. Lots of pictures of those shared around the internet today. I slept through the whole thing and had no idea it was happening. I like to go to bed early. But apparently it's happening again tonight. So maybe I'll stay up a little bit later and see if I can catch a glimpse of that. But very odd, very unusual and very interesting. I have no idea what's causing it, nor does anyone else who I've spoken to about it so far. But can only be a good thing, right? I don't know. But we've got in the chat Gwen saying beautiful weather in the Midlands and beautiful weather in Berkshire. Excellent. And I'm here in Lancashire, where we are also having beautiful weather. So that is all I've got to say on that. Welcome. Glad you're here. We're going to do another 2 chapters tonight. We've got another 2 chapters. And what a whirlwind it has been. And I'm enjoying every minute of this book. And I'm very excited and happy to be sharing it with you. And just grateful that people are interested in this sort of thing and are showing up to get learnified and edumacated, because there's a lot that we don't know about the past, a lot that is left out, and we don't see it in the BBC documentaries, and we don't get it in our history degrees, and so we got to dive into the books, and that's what we're doing on this channel. And so it's always a wonderful thing that other people out there are interested in doing this, and it's not just me who's nerding out on books on my own. So before we get into, I don't have a big preamble intro, just a few bits of housekeeping and sort of telling you about, if you're new here, perhaps what I do. So this is a Hayes Reviews YouTube channel. We are live streaming 7 p.m. Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays UK time, and we will continue to do so until we finish this book, and then I might have a bit of time off. But you can see on the channel here, if you are interested in learning more or exploring more, you can have a look at the links. And all the links are there for places to see where we're streaming, for ways to contribute and donate and support if you're interested in doing that. I have been, making more clips, more short clips to share around. So you can see here on the videos tab, I added a new 1.5 minute video, Is the UN a Religious Cult? And then also a 2-minute video here about where does the Fabian Freeway lead. So these are good little snippets of things that you can share around, send to other people, give them a taste, an idea, a flavor of what goes on in the longer streams here. And it might be a little more digestible. I've edited out the ums and ahs and the swallowing sounds and all those other off-putting things that people who are used to excellent audio quality get triggered by. But, all you ASMR fans out there, you probably dig it. So I can't please everybody, can I? But in these clips, I've done my best to make them concise and punchy and to the point. And I have even put some pictures in there. So there's stuff to look at. You can see this one's got a picture of frogs being boiled, which is a very important and appropriate metaphor for what's going on in the modern day. And in this one here, we've got a picture of the UN. So I've been doing that. And you know what? This one I actually did today, and it took me about 4 hours to put this together. So from finding the clip and pulling it out of the longer episode and then editing it down and putting the music and the outro and the pictures into it and then uploading it took me about 4 hours. So I will get faster at doing it and more efficient as we go on. But that's the kind of work that's going into these kind of things. And I don't mention that because I want any praise or recognition, but anyone who's putting out content, who's making videos, who's trying to educate and inform and inspire and uplift and empower through this medium, it's a lot of work, and they are really people don't do it unless they care about it, I think. And yes, today we have software and what so-called AI, which I think stands for artificial information, to help us out and cut corners and things. I don't use any of that. I do it all the old school way with a mouse and lots of clicks. But and I think that comes through. I think that translates. So just to let you know that anyone who's out there that you appreciate, who's doing good work that you're benefiting from, consider supporting them, whoever it is. I personally am a big fan of Last American Vagabond. I like James Corbett. I like Jay Dyer. I like Whitney Webb of Unlimited Hangout. I like Richard Grove. And I support all of those creators. I've gained immense value from their work. And it does take a lot behind the scenes of sitting down and being locked away in a when the weather's nice. So anyone out there who you're benefiting from, consider supporting them, because I think it's an important job, and that is that. So this is my YouTube page. Oh, the other thing on YouTube is playlists. Playlist tab. This is where you can find all the books that we've read through so far. Going back to our first one, which was The Open Conspiracy by H.G. Wells. And this is our 6th book that we're continuing with tonight. And we are on part 6. And I think we're making good progress. Can you see that? That's how far we are through the book. So we've got between this bookmark and this little tab here to go. So we're about a third of the way through, actually. So we've probably got maybe another 12 videos to do, which is about another 3 videos a week. So we've got about another 4 weeks on this. So shut up, Nick. Let's get on with it, because we need to get into the book, basically. We are also streaming tonight on Rumble. We are also streaming tonight on Odyssey. And we are also streaming tonight on Entropy. So plenty of options if you are not a big fan of the gulag tube, the censorship, the deplatforming, and all the nonsense that goes on. You've got other options out there. other freedom, free speech oriented platforms that are built on better technologies with a better ethos and ethic behind them, there are other options. The All My Links page, this has all my links. Surprise, surprise. So you've got ways to donate and support if you choose to do so. There's a link to the Telegram group where we vote on the next books that are coming up, and we share resources and have conversations, and we identify good deals on books, and we help each other build our libraries and conduct investigations and further research in and around the topics that I discuss on the channel. Then we got Instagram. I've been putting short clips on Instagram recently. They seem to be going down fairly well. So shorter clips on Instagram, 1 or 2 minute clips. But also I put on there book reviews that give you a peek into the book, some contents pages, some references, some forewords, some blurbs. These sorts of things go on there. Then the channels we're streaming to, the crypto wallets, and then a few links at the bottom here that I don't use very much. And also this one, which is... I don't know, the platform formerly known as Twitter. I've got a few things going up on there now. I'm not putting a huge amount of effort into this, but it's there just in case we ever need it. And you never know. Okay, so that is... And then underneath the video, again, lots of other links. So all my links has all stuff to do with me, but underneath the video, you can find my affiliates. And the affiliates are all content creators and products and courses that I think are valuable, that I've benefited from, that I think other people out there could benefit from too. Now, not everybody needs these courses. Not everybody needs the learning. We're all at different stages. We all have different areas of expertise and knowledge. So not all of these things are for everybody by any stretch of the imagination, but they are there, and I think they're good. So the top one is G. Edward Griffin's Red Pill Expo 2024. Now that is coming up. That's going to be up very soon, in fact. Let's open that in a tab and just have a look at it. I think it might even be next month. And I don't know, there's a little verification thing that's happening. So June 15th and 16th, because you know something is wrong, helping truth seekers understand how the world really works. So this is G. Edward Griffin, the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island, which is one of the seminal exposés on the Federal Reserve System in America. But as well as that, he's written other books about cancer. He's written just, what was the other big one that he did? It escapes me now. It's off the top of my head, I can't remember. But he's been at it for quite a long time. He has an incredible life story. His journey into doing this kind of work is phenomenal and very much worth listening to. But he educates people, and he puts on events, and he gets world-class speakers to come and speak at those events, as you can see on the list here. He's got David Webb, he's got Andrew Kaufman, G. Edward Griffin himself will be presenting. He's got Mickey Wills, who created the trilogy of films, the Plandemic trilogy of films. So that will be an event that you can attend in person if you're in that part of the world, but you can also watch it online and stream it and support freedom fighters and content creators. So that's my affiliate link for that underneath the video tonight. As well as that, I have the Autonomy, which is a course of action designed, created, and taught by Richard Grove. He teaches it twice a year. This course altered the trajectory of my life in ways that I never could have thought about or expected or predicted when I signed up. I thought I was signing up for a course that would teach me a few new skills, maybe a few new ways to earn money, and it would just help me figure out my next step in life. I thought it would just give me some options. I was looking for options. I was in a job that wasn't paying enough. It was a dead end, and I needed a change. I got way more than I bargained for when I signed up for this course. I've made lifelong friends. I have learned I can't even put it into words, the things that I've learned and the self-development that I've undergone, the self-transformation, the increase in my confidence, my ability to speak, to approach people, to seize opportunities, to come up with creative ideas, my belief in myself, and also my belief in the potential of not only myself, but the people around me and humanity as a whole. This course has given me more optimism and gratitude and reasons to feel good about life than I ever could have thought it would. And I still continue to benefit to this day from the things that I learned, the principles. I still meet people as new students come in. I get to know them and build working relationships and friendships. So if any of that sounds good to you, this is really a great place to go. If you're in a dead-end job, if you are looking for new ways to make money, if you are looking to expand your high-value skill set, maybe you want to start a business, maybe you want to teach something, but you're not quite sure how to get that idea up and running and off the ground. This course is all about the mindset that you're going to need in order to do that, and then also the high-level sort of mapped out skill set and structure and what's the word that I'm looking at? Framework that you're going to have to work within to get something up and running. So it's a very powerful, long-term lifestyle reboot, okay? And believe me when I say that it says it's a 12-week course. I did it. I went through season 5. Season 11 is currently underway. And I'm still going back and taking part and benefiting. And this channel and what we're doing here, none of this would exist if I hadn't signed up for this course in the first place, right? So I wouldn't even have a fraction of I would probably still be reading novels. I would probably still be in the minimum wage dead-end job that I was in. Maybe I would have moved on to something else by now. But that is something worth considering for anyone who is looking for a change in momentum and a change in trajectory. That's what I would say. So some free resources to explore underneath. Then we have Richard Grove. He's the teacher and creator of Autonomy. He has some resources, the Grand Theft World podcast community, and also his history blueprint and his brain model. So he's been building this brain model of all the different kind of connections that we talk about and we find out in these books. He's been putting them together in one place, making them links. You can learn how to use that, and you can buy a copy and use it for your own research if that's something you're interested in. We've got the Very Independent Producer Summits, where you get to hear from James Corbett, Mark Passio, John Bush, G. Edward Griffin, Jay Dyer, Ryan Christian, and a whole load more about how they do what they do, how they make a living from fighting for truth and freedom and helping people to educate and inspire and uplift. If you want to do something similar with your life and you wonder how do these guys do it, then you can learn from them, and it's all free. Underneath that, we have a bunch of courses that are just good and useful for people in this day and age. We're living in the post-COVID era, and we might all be looking at things through a totally new lens than we were 5 years ago, and realizing that we might need more knowledge and skills than we previously thought we would have to rely on. So we might need, for example, to know more about forming communities. We might need to know more about how to do objective research. We might need some logic and intellectual self-defense. We might need to recognize those logical fallacies that are used against us so often to manipulate people and control people. We might need to know the history of philosophy, the history of ideas, the conversation that goes back thousands of years, which the big revelation to me on that particular course was finding out that simulation theory is an old idea that was largely debunked a long time ago. You might want to learn something a little more practical like cloud hosting, or you might want to get a handle on your health with the health blueprint, or get into some gardening and recognize the revolutionary aspects of growing your own food, growing your own herbs, which basically means growing your own medicine, and using this as something that can save you money, that can get you connected with nature, that can give you a creative outlet and a purpose and a hobby, get you outside, and give you something you can barter with if times get tough and the inflation keeps going crazy and people are starting to turn to exchanging and swapping. Then having some herbs or some food on hand to swap and exchange might be useful, right? And all of those are available in the Autonomy Agora Marketplace, where you can go and browse the full list and have a look, see if anything there is interesting or stands out to you. So that is I think, last thing I wanted to mention. Yes. Oh, no. One more thing. On Sunday, I have the honor and pleasure of being invited to make an appearance on the Amish Inquisitions podcast. So these boys, they're down the road from me, actually, here in Lancashire. And they asked me to come on and talk to them. So that's going to be 8 p.m. on Sunday night, tomorrow night. That's 8 p.m. UK time, and we are going to be talking about books. Surprise, surprise. But that is going to be a lot of fun. And I'm really looking forward to that. It should be very exciting. And I know that they have quite an impressive bookshelf stacked full of books on the set of their podcast behind them. So I think that's going to be very edifying and educational and interesting. So if you are around and looking for some entertainment tomorrow evening and see me in a little bit of a different format, because usually it's just me talking into the camera and the microphone at you. It's kind of a one-way thing. Tomorrow we're going to have more of a conversation going on, a little back and forth. So I'm kind of out of my comfort zone. You can come and watch me squirm if you feel so inclined to do so. That would be lovely to have you there. And I think that is definitely it now. So we'll go back to this cam and move a few screens around, and then we'll get into the reading. So how are you all doing tonight? I hope you're doing well. It's been a lovely day, and I think people are very much grateful for the good weather and the sunshine, despite the constant spraying. What I noticed today was that the spraying was still happening, but it seemed to be much, much, much higher than usual. So like very, very far off in the distance, I could see the planes going across. But what's happening in the chat? LJ is staying up tonight to catch the light show. A lot of people have been getting really good photos. They're saying you have to look at it through your phone camera in order to get the colors, because it's hard to see with the naked eye. Sadie's is here. Good evening. Elizabeth Kendall, hello. Elizabeth's watching on YouTube through the TV because she likes to see it on the big screen. Yes, awesome. You can see all my you can see my slightly sunburnt face here, the pores on my forehead maybe. But more importantly, you could probably read the titles of all the books on the shelves behind me. I bet that's why you want to see it on the big screen, isn't it? All right, that's it then. That's my spiel. Let's get into the book. So, Fabian Freeway. This is turning into quite a wonderful read, and I'm very grateful to everybody who voted and picked it. The High Road to Socialism in the USA. I think one of the takeaways for me from going on this journey and reading from this book is how these ism words, communism, capitalism, socialism, etc., how they're kind of vague in a lot of ways, and people talk about them and throw them around all the time as though there's this agreed upon, understood definition of what they're talking about. But if you remember, we went to the Wikipedia page for socialism, and it said it was kind of vague. It didn't really give a very concrete definition of here is what happens in a socialist society, but because it said that it appealed to, it said it was apolitical, and it said that the socialism can happen in any kind of country. It doesn't have to be a first world. It could be first world, third world. One of the key aspects of socialism, though, was the kind of the public ownership of things, the public ownership of the means of production, and this tension between the individual and the community, or the one and the many, and how socialism is aimed at removing the individual's rights to property in favor of, well, everybody owns everything and we all share it, which appeals to those of us who are kind of generous in nature, those of us who don't want to see inequality, those of us who want to see everybody having enough to live and thrive and have a good life. So it's a very deceptive ism, because it appeals to our instincts for fairness and justice and equality, which are all good things, and which we should strive to create in the world. I think everyone can agree that justice and fairness and equality are good things, but the socialism promise of those things, it promises those things, but it doesn't deliver them. And I think what we're learning is the people, the Fabian society who were promising these things never intended to deliver them at all. They had a totally different plan. They had a plan which was very separate to the descriptions of socialism, which sound good when you're debating them in the pub and arguing with people and going back and forth. Well, it needs to be more fairer, and we need to make sure that the people who don't have much have something and enough to survive. And it sounds good, and you sound like a good person for pushing it. But I think these Fabian socialists, they actually weren't all that interested in making life better for the average person. I think, in fact, they knew that in order to administer this top-down, state-controlled, state control is the only word I can think of, but there's another thing there. The state has to, in a socialist system, the state has to gather everything up and then distribute it. That's the word I'm looking for. The state distribution of things, right? What these boys and girls realized is that they want to be the ones who are gathering it all up and deciding who gets what. Because in any system that it's socialist or communist, you're going to have this centralized authority, which, as I said, collects all the resources or gathers all the data on everything and then assesses who gets what and then doles it out according to some arbitrary rules that they tell you are very fair. And obviously the people in control of that are going to give themselves more. They're going to hold themselves in higher esteem and say, well, we're more important because we're overseeing the system, so we have to have bonuses and country houses and yachts and all this other good stuff. But you only get an egg and a half a week. I think that was what happened, wasn't it, during the first Labour government, 1945 to 1951, the first 6 years of the first Labour government in the UK after the Labour Party was formed by the Fabian socialists going around and infiltrating and penetrating workers' unions and working groups and getting them all to unite and creating this new political party called the Labour Party, which went from third place to second place to first place very rapidly. The Liberal Party in the UK then ceded all its votes to the Labour Party, thus making itself extinct, kaput, basically. And then they got in control, and then in the first 6 years, they just created this heavy, bloated, complicated bureaucracy where they were gathering data and they were making people fill out forms and apply for permits and licenses, and it just ground the whole thing into a halt, and it made the average person poorer. The average person had, like I said, an egg and a half to eat a week because that was all that was rationed out to them. The economy went down. They smashed it to bits. Then when they came out of power and a conservative government got back in, trying to unpick and undo the damage they'd done, all these Fabian socialists then just started jet-setting around the world, preaching this system to other countries, the system that had failed spectacularly in England. And we left off the reading of the book where the American side of things had been unfolding. So while we had this group here in Britain getting together, they met for the first time in 1884 at Edward Pease's house, and they consisted of a lot of people who had inherited wealth, and they were very snobby, and they were very sure of themselves, and they didn't want to work. They wanted to figure out a way that they could enjoy the good life and live well without doing any work. And I think that's why they like the idea of being the administrators of a socialist bureaucracy in which they got to control what everybody else gets. Because in that sense, you get to give yourself whatever, you give yourself the best bits, and then you let everyone else have, whatever's left, and they can fight over it, and they can have this situation of artificial scarcity. And so at the same time that was happening in America, we had some American Fabian societies modeling themselves after the British Fabians and holding meetings. And there was a famous novel that was published, and I forget the name of it now. If anyone remembers that, just stick it in the chat, please. Looking Backwards, I think the novel was called. And this novel was a kind of socialist utopia novel, which was 100 years or something in the future. And the characters then looking backwards and explaining how wonderful life was now that they'd achieved socialism. And this book was printed and it was reviewed in all of the magazines and the newspapers, and it was given 5 stars, and everyone said, isn't it fantastic? And they spread basically socialist propaganda. They spread this all through America while things were picking up and taking off here in the UK as well. So it was kind of happening concurrently in both places at the same time. And that's pretty much where we got to at the end of the last reading. So let's continue. We are on tonight. Chapter 11. The Professor Goes to Washington. Excuse me a minute, I'm just going to have to adjust my mic. All right, I think we're good to go. The Professor Goes to Washington. Far from the noise of popular celebrations which hailed the hopeful opening of the 20th century, a small but crucial event occurred in England that seemed straight out of Alice in Wonderland. Sidney Webb induced the Royal Commission of London University to declare economics a science. And once declared so by that august body, it was assumed to be so. I really love Rose Martin's tone in the way she writes this. She's got a kind of sardonic, sometimes sarcastic and ironic way of referring to these people and their outlook and their way of doing things. She's really good. For an American, she does irony and sarcasm pretty well. On February the 20th, 1900, Beatrice Webb confided to her diary, quote, "This divorce of economics from metaphysics and shoddy history is a great gain," end quote. That is, for the advancement of scientific socialism in the English-speaking world. Crucial admission there by Beatrice Webb in her diary, the divorce of economics from metaphysics. Now, metaphysics is a really key component of philosophy. You have... Okay, I can't list it. You need to go and see the Jay Dyer's Philosophy 101 course. But he talks about this. Metaphysics, there's metaphysics, ethics, and epistemology. And metaphysics has been all but disregarded by the modern academics, which is in now a state of what's called postmodernism, which is all about relativism. And it's very solipsistic in that the idea is, well, you and only you can decide what truth is for yourself and live out your truth and what is true for you. And I'll have my truth, and then everyone will have a different version of their truth, and chaos and depravity. But they don't say this bit, but then what that leads to is chaos and depravity. What they tell you, it will lead to freedom and happiness, but it's not true. Part of the problem and the reason that that's happened is because metaphysics has been cast aside, and it's not part of educational curriculum anymore. It's not part of the training. We should be talking about this kind of thing probably in like secondary school, I would have thought. If schooling was actually there to educate and inform and uplift and create citizens who are capable of rational thought and analytical skills, then we should be learning about metaphysics probably around secondary school. No, I didn't hear about metaphysics till I was 36 years old from Jay Dyer, you know? So very important and telling and critical admission here. And Beatrice Webb is happy that metaphysics has now been divorced from economics, which has been announced as a science, which ties in with technocracy, ruled by scientific elite, by a top-down bureaucracy with clipboards and white jackets, and software programs which just make all the decisions and dictate to you how many eggs you get to eat every week. Spoiler alert: 0. Unless they're fake eggs made from some sort of algae and fungus. She admitted blandly that the coup had been achieved by trickery through successfully packing the University of London Commission. Okay, we've got to read the footnote for that. That is Beatrice Webb's book, Our Partnership, published in 1948. So she's admitting that this announcement of economics as a science was achieved by trickery, and the trickery was successfully packing, which I think means getting their people, their men, their women into, they're kind of like packing the jury with all the people who you know or you can influence or you have leverage over. They've successfully packed the University of London Commission who presumably made this decision. And she admits that in her book, Our Partnership, from 1948. So that'd be a key bit of evidence to get your hands on if you are in the evidence gathering game. In those days, science was a word to conjure with, and the webs were gifted at legerdemain. Now, legerdemain... we haven't even got off the first page yet, and I'm interrupting too much tonight. Apologies. But for anyone who wasn't here, legerdemain means light hand, light-fingered. It means a kind of sleight of hand, when you, like a pickpocket or a magician, somebody who can, distract you with one hand while they rob you with the other hand. So that's what legerdemain means. And I actually had someone in the audience look that up for me in real time, because the first time I found it in this book, I wasn't sure what it meant. So correct me if I'm wrong in that definition, but I think I got that right. While attracting little general notice, the Royal Commission's pronouncement went a long way toward establishing the authority of research and teaching methods pursued with political intent by British Fabians. Not only at the Little London School of Economics, where they ruled supreme, but also at the larger universities of England and America, where they were making converts. So the footnote for this London School of Economics says, in 1895, 5 years after its founding, the London School of Economics, then occupying 2 rooms in Adelphi, boasted exactly 8 registered students and 2 lecturers. One of these instructors was the director W.A.S. Hewins, who voiced conservative views on economics, but faithfully followed Sidney Webb's lead in matters of organisation. The other was the radical Graham Wallace, whose field was politics, and that is from Max Beer's book, 50 Years of International Socialism, from 1935. Soon, other types of social inquiry were invested with the lofty title of social science, and presumed by a guileless public to be as free as the physical sciences from subjective or doctrinal bias. Thus, professors who happened to be socialists could present propagandist conclusions as though they were laws of nature determined by, quote, impartial research. No wonder the British Fabian socialist John Atkinson Hobson, who wrote Free Thought in the Social Sciences, pointing out the uses of social psychology as a tool for manipulating the masses, could assert so confidently, if somewhat after the fact, that the future secret weapon of strategy would be the university professor. Whew. More speedily than in England, Hobson's dictum proved true in the United States, where professors as well as students aspired to become the future rulers of America. All across the continent, at the turn of the century, little clusters of college professors had begun studying socialism in secret, because an open avowal of such interest might have led to their dismissal. Recalling his youth as an instructor at the University of California, Dr. Harry L. Overstreet, long a professor of philosophy at the City College of New York and sponsor of many socialist causes, said, "We were studying socialism and didn't want anyone to know we were doing it." At the Philadelphia University Extension, a group of self-styled liberals gathered around Woodrow Wilson, professor of jurisprudence and political science at Princeton University. Most of them held regular positions elsewhere, as Wilson did, commuting to Philadelphia to lecture in their free time as a means of augmenting their incomes and improving their extracurricular contacts. Some, like Professor Henry C. Adams and, at a later date, Professor Richard T. Elley, were the acknowledged leaders of academic socialism in their day. Others belonging to the Wilson Circle were Dr. Albert Shaw of the Review of Reviews, Professor William Graham Sumner, who explained morality in terms of folkways and tribal taboos, and who helped blur the distinctions between primitive and civilized man to an extent still reflected today in United States foreign policy, and the Reverend William Bayard Hale, editor and correspondent, who had gone to Oxford in 1895 and returned to write The Eternal Teacher, advocating a species of Christian socialism akin to that of W.D.P. Bliss. They contributed to the University Extension World, which became the American Journal of Sociology, and they brought to the group, if nothing more, an awareness of the municipal politics of Sidney and Beatrice Webb. With other American intellectuals of British ancestry, they attended summer meetings at Oxford announced in The Citizen, a publication of the Philadelphia University. British extension-type lecturers such as J. Hudson Shaw, better known as Broman Villiers, and the arch-Fabian Graham Wallas, both of whom also taught at summer sessions in Philadelphia and New York, addressed the visiting scholars. The ancient halls and towers of Oxford provided a mellow setting for spokesmen from the London School of Economics still in its somewhat unpromising infancy. It is remarkable, and certainly a tribute to the Fabian talent for impressing Americans, that so small and ill-favoured a nursling, which the London School continued to be for some years, had already gained so large a reputation among leaders of liberal thought in the United States. Even after he became president of Princeton University in 1902 and could no longer participate actively in the work of the Philadelphia University Extension, Woodrow Wilson continued to take a lively interest in that little backwater of academic ferment. New personalities appeared there from time to time whose interest in national politics was undisguised. Among them were William T. Harrison, United States Commissioner of Education under Theodore Roosevelt, and Columbia University's chief political economist Dr. E.R.A. Seligman, one of the earliest to perceive the presidential possibilities of Woodrow Wilson. There was also Lincoln Steffens, who wrote The Shame of the Cities for McClure's magazine, a series purporting to expose corruption and poverty in American cities and suggested by the Fabian tract, Facts for Londoners. An early article in the New England magazine of June 1894 by the migrant British Fabian William A. Clark had quoted the poet Shelley as saying, quote, "Hell is a city very much like London," end quote, and remarked that Shelley was unfair to hell. The same Manichaean spirit pervaded Steffens' work, though expressed in the astringent journalistic style known as muckraking, then coming into vogue. For a dozen years, Fabian-type fact-fighting in a popular vein, practiced not only by outspoken socialists like Lincoln Steffens and Upton Sinclair, but by such skilled reporters as Ray Stannard Baker and Ida Tarbell, who only leaned toward socialism, enjoyed a field day in the American press. In a period when Fabian socialists were devoting themselves to penetration and permeation of the Liberal Party in England, a mixed bag of professors and publicists who had borrowed the liberal label prepared the way for a similar parasitic development in the United States. To a greater or lesser degree, they had been touched by socialist ideas, a condition unsuspected by the general run of Americans. Within a surprisingly short time, Dr. Woodrow Wilson, the professor's choice, became the Democratic Party's candidate for the presidency of the United States. He was elected due to a split in Republican ranks, fomented in part by old-fashioned patriots, in part by Eastern liberals and Midwestern progressives. Immediately after Wilson's election, the United States Department of Labor was established. It absorbed the old Bureau of Labor, now the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The Bureau furnished, like the factory inspectors' reports in England, facts and figures socialists have utilized to advantage for agitation and propaganda purposes. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is known today chiefly as the oracular source of the monthly Consumer Price Index, to which the escalator clause in many modern union contracts is tied, and which assures an overall, if gradual, inflationary spiral. That move to consolidate federal labor agencies in Washington had been promoted by the Fabian W.D.P. Bliss, who became a Bureau of Labor investigator in 1907, the first of a flock of socialist bureaucrats who have quietly roosted in the Department of Labor ever since. The wide and variegated connections enjoyed by Bliss were evident in the list of contributors to his New Encyclopedia of Social Reform, published by Funk and Wagnalls in 1908. There, the names of well-known British Fabians, such as Paul C. Alden MP, Right Honourable John Burns, Sidney Webb, Edward R. Pease, and leading American socialists of the day, Professors E. W. Bemis and F. H. Giddings, Morris Hillquit, Robert Hunter, Upton Sinclair, appeared side by side with names of such eminent non-socialists as Samuel Gompers, Honourable Oscar Strauss, Booker T. Washington, and Cardinal Gibbons. Under the Wilson administration, still another long-desired Fabian socialist objective became a reality, the income tax, which was superimposed on the older and kindlier American traditions of indirect taxation. Originally proposed by Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto, a heavily graduated income tax had been urged by American Fabian Leaguers as well as by their mentors of the London Fabian Society. Twice branded unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court, it was finally legalized by pushing through the 16th Amendment to the Constitution after the outbreak of World War I, at a time when distracting questions of foreign policy were uppermost in the public mind. The income tax became law in 1916, just in time to help pay for the war, a war out of which Woodrow Wilson had vowed to keep the country. Feather light at the beginning, like the old man of the sea, it has proved a progressively heavier burden upon the shoulders of an entire people, as well as a subtle political device for altering the basic economy and social structure of the nation. Yes. Absolutely. This chapter is fire so far. Absolutely critical information, every single part of it. But I think this whole bit here about the income tax is one of the key tells that the plans and schemes of these people, that we're living in them, that they got it, that they rolled it out. Because when do the taxes ever get reduced? When do the taxes ever get rolled back or cancelled? You know? So we're still in this system and we are still being taxed to the absolute hilt in every which way they can possibly do it, from every single angle they can possibly do it. And I'm saying we, talking about Britain here mainly, but certainly in America too, other countries, similar sort of thing. But that is the Fabian socialist system at play, right? So they tell you, oh, you live in a liberal democracy, but if you can't, well, firstly, if you can't withdraw your consent from that and just disengage from the system, then it's not consent-based, which means it's slavery, right? And then secondly, all this money that is the you work to earn, you give up your precious minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years to the earning of this currency that you are forced to use, because if you don't have it, then you can't engage in the economy, you can't buy products and services and food and etc. So you're forced to use the currency. Then you're forced by threat of imprisonment to give up a certain amount of this fake money to the people in charge, the people with the monopoly on violence. And then I can't remember the point that I was going to make. Oh, the point is that this is what it started with. It started with this income tax, twice branded unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court. Twice they tried to get it through. Twice the United Supreme Court said, no, that's unconstitutional. We don't want it. Get rid of it. And yet they got it through, third time lucky. And how did they get it through? Well, they got it through while everyone was looking at questions of foreign policy, and everyone's looking over here, the ledger domain, looking over here, distracting you with all this political foreign policy stuff over here. Meanwhile, the left hand is passing this income tax through. And it's just tiny, it's just tiny, it's a sliver, it's 1% of 1%. You won't even know, it's not going to make any difference. And now look where we are. Now look where the Fabian, gradual, slow, plodding, progressive planning has taken us all these years later. Right? And this is what's so powerful about reading a book like this. This was 1966. Now we can look what's happened between 1966 and 2024. And we can see that it's just carried on rolling out. More taxes, more squeezing of the lower and middle classes, more devaluation of the currencies, the fiat, like nonsense fiat currencies that we're forced to use. It's clear as day. This is why I've said I've enjoyed reading this book so much, because it gives me a narrative of why things are the way they are that actually makes sense and is believable. It isn't just, buzzword gargling with buzzwords, which is what a lot of politicians do. They just kind of like say words and they do it in a way that sort of sounds like they're intelligent, they know what they're on about, but actually they're not saying anything. Frank's mentioning the value-added tax. What a punitive disincentive mechanism in its very concept. Yeah, well said. So, this chapter is meaty. This is one of the best yet. Anyway, back to the book. While Woodrow Wilson could not actually be named a socialist, he was the first chief executive of the United States to accept socialist-minded intellectuals as aides and advisors, and to present Fabian socialist programs as his own. His book, The New Freedom, was an early attempt to equate the Democratic Party with a strange new concept of democracy which mirrored the industrial or social democracy of the British Fabians. As he admitted in the preface, with a frankness seldom matched today, he did not write the book at all. It was compiled by a former colleague of the Philadelphia University Extension days, the Christian socialist William Bayard Hale, on the basis of Wilson's 1912 campaign speeches. From first to last, the New Freedom denounced capitalism as being contrary to the interests of the common man. Justice, not charity, was its theme. Somewhat quaintly, it identified the captains of industry of the day with the trustees of Princeton University, who seemed to have given Dr. Wilson a hard time during his presidency of that institution. Opening with the bleak assertion, reiterated by Wilson's political successors during half a century of unparalleled industrial growth, that the American economy was stagnant and individual opportunity was dead, it stated, quote, "We stand in the presence of a revolution, not a bloody revolution. America is not given to the spilling of blood." How could he? America is not given to the spilling of blood. Okay. But a silent revolution, whereby America will insist upon recovering in practice those ideals which she has always professed, upon securing a government devoted to the general and not to the special interests. End quote. And it concluded with the premature but eerie prediction. Quote, "We are just upon the threshold of a time when the systematic life of this country will be sustained, or at least supplemented at every point by government activity. And we have now to determine what kind of governmental activity it shall be, whether, in the first place, it shall be direct from the government itself, or whether it shall be indirect through instrumentalities which have already constituted themselves and which stand ready to supersede the government." This book is something that I think is probably worth getting hold of. I better put a white card in here to remind me to. So that's The New Freedom by Woodrow Wilson. If anyone can find a copy of that, probably worth getting. The instrumentalities referred to by Wilson were large industrial and financial concerns, headed by the United States Steel Corporation and J.P. Morgan and Company, which, according to the socialist demonology of the period, constituted a kind of invisible government. Whatever instrumentalities may stand ready to supersede the American government today are internationalist in character and Fabian socialist directed. And it was in Wilson's time that such left-wing groups made their first tentative efforts to grasp power in the United States by exerting influence over the chief executive. As Bellamy had done, The New Freedom called for, quote, "a new Declaration of Independence," end quote. It deplored the system of checks and balances in government, devised by well-meaning but sadly outdated founding fathers, and demanded an, quote, "evolutionary interpretation of the Constitution, as well as sweeping changes in the judiciary." Quote, "development" and, quote, "evolution" were the new scientific watchwords. Having been a teacher of law in its political aspects, Wilson found the judicial outlook of Louis D. Brandeis, Harvard Law School professor, highly congenial. Brandeis was the author of the historic Brandeis Brief, which ushered in a whole new phase of constitutional law based more on sociological than legal interpretations. He was a frequent caller at the White House during the first Wilson administration, when others found it difficult to see the president. Together with the progressive Senator La Follette of Wisconsin, he plied Wilson liberally with advice and information. Brandeis had read and greatly admired Wealth Against Commonwealth by Henry Demarest Lloyd of the American Fabian League. In fact, it was through Lloyd that Brandeis was asked to serve on a panel of lawyers to present the miners' case before Theodore Roosevelt's Anthracite Coal Commission of 1902. For a time, American Fabians and their liberal satellites had hoped to advance their cause through the new nationalism of the first President Roosevelt. but they found that Roosevelt's interest in genuinely needed regulation and reforms stopped short of tampering with the Constitution. The Harvard jurist was a close friend of Florence Kelley of the National Consumers League, whose activities in behalf of working-class women and children demonstrated dramatically how middle-class socialists in the early 1900s managed to capture the momentum of legitimate reform drives for their own far-flung ends. Brandeis was for years a neighbour of Elizabeth Glendower Evans, socialist hostess and financial angel with whom Florence Kelley's daughter lived while studying at Radcliffe. When the Oregon 10-hour law for women was due for a test before the Supreme Court, Florence Kelley enlisted the services of Brandeis. His niece, Josephine Goldmark, aide and biographer of Florence Kelley, has described the circumstances under which the now famous Brandeis brief was prepared in 1907. For 2 hectic weeks, Josephine Goldmark and Florence Kelley assembled and sifted a huge mass of statistics, reports, and precedents from foreign lands, hastily supplied by socialist researchers. The result was something new in legal presentations, with a mere page and a half of legal argument attached to many pages of carefully slanted social and economic research, which the honourable justices were scarcely equipped by training or experience to evaluate. Termed revolutionary at the time, this method, based on a novel concept of juridical notice, has by now become standard practice and serves, at least in part, to explain some otherwise baffling Supreme Court decisions of recent years. Significantly, Woodrow Wilson named Louis D. Brandeis nominally a progressive Republican to the Supreme Court in 1915, where he continued to work for liberalization of the Constitution. His appointment was bitterly contested in the Senate, along with the appointment of a former Harvard Law School instructor and fellow progressive George Rubley to the Federal Trade Commission. Born in Wisconsin, Rubley was a polished product of both Groton and Harvard. His vacations in Cornish, New Hampshire, dated from an era when visitors to Washington, who had tried and failed to reach the president, complained, quote, "Wilson stays in Cornish and communes with God." During the summer of 1914, Wilson occupied the spacious red brick home of the American novelist Winston Churchill in Cornish, while the chief presidential advisor, Colonel Edward M. House, resided in nearby Manchester. Wilson occupied the spacious red brick home of the American novelist Winston Churchill. I didn't know Winston Churchill was an American novelist, unless there's an American novelist with the same name. But there is Colonel Edward Mandell House, who Frank was asking after in the chat. I think that's the first time we've seen his name mentioned so far. But Colonel House, incredibly interesting figure, and probably a better word for his role would be handler instead of presidential advisor, as he's labelled here. Members of the discreet summer colony, which developed in Cornish and survived for decades, included Edward Burling, Sir Rubley's colleague on the World War I shipping board, and his partner in a Washington law firm that specialized in hiring Harvard alumni who had been law clerks in Justice Brandeis' office. Cornish familiars also included Philip Littell, later an editor of the liberal Fabian weekly, The New Republic, and the very personable Professor Robert Morse Lovett, who was to serve as the leading frontman for revived American Fabian socialist organizations after World War I. Some wintered at the Turtle Bay Colony in Manhattan. All had been honor students at Harvard together in the late 1880s and early 1890s, when Bellamy's nationalism, adorned with touches of John Ruskin and William Morris, captivated young campus intellectuals. The old school tie endured, and in a rarefied, profitable, and mysterious fashion, certain of its wearers permeated the highest circles in Washington politics and New York finance, particularly after a third partner in the Burling-Rubley law firm, Dean Acheson, became Undersecretary of the Treasury and Secretary of State in later administrations. Still another member of that long-lived Harvard group was Thomas W. Lamont, Sr., affectionately known to old college chums as Tommy, who never ceased to be impressed by the superior wisdom of George Rubley, an upper-class man, when Lamont was a sophomore. From financial reporter on a New Jersey newspaper, Lamont rose to become a senior partner of J.P. Morgan and Company, in the dismantlement of which he eventually assisted. In 1933, Lamont signed the so-called Banker's Report, advocating diplomatic recognition of Soviet Russia. As President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson did not hesitate to name outspoken socialists to obscure but critical posts in government. A case in point was Fred C. Howe, Wilson's Commissioner of Immigration at the Port of New York. A writer and lecturer by profession, Howe resigned after a congressional investigation into alleged neglect of duty in connection with his unauthorized action in releasing alien radicals held for deportation by the Department of Justice. Both before and after the incident, he figured prominently in a number of socialist-dominated organizations. Wilson had also sent the Christian socialist William Bayard Hale as his special representative to revolution-torn Mexico in 1913 to 1914, instituting a species of presidential diplomacy which has since become almost routine. In Mexico, Wilson received private reports both from Hale and from another erstwhile lecturer at the Philadelphia University Extension, Lincoln Steffens, who was in Veracruz to attend a socialist conference in 1914. Those reports helped to effect some curious results, including support and eventual recognition of the junta of General Venustiano Carranza, at a time when the latter controlled no more than 90 square kilometers in all Mexico, and when his councils were deeply infiltrated by agents of German military intelligence. In 1940 to 41, the writer of this book was permitted to examine the Woodrow Wilson papers in the Library of Congress. A folder relating to Mexico contained a personal letter from Secretary of State Robert Lansing, commenting on Wilson's preference for soliciting amateur advice, often contrary to the observations of seasoned and responsible officials. Recent hearings before the Senate Subcommittee on Internal Security disclosed that, in a more recent Latin American crisis, diplomatic policies of the United States, which placed and have maintained Fidel Castro in power, were similarly instigated by reports from a, quote, liberal journalist, Herbert L. Matthews of the New York Times. Meanwhile, well-founded advance warnings by professional diplomats concerning Castro's long-standing Moscow ties were ignored or suppressed. Compounding that folly, plans for the ill-starred Bay of Pigs invasion were entrusted to amateurs under presidential supervision rather than to military technicians. So, from all indications, history repeats itself, and the same brand of socialist suggested ineptitude as practiced by President Wilson has once more invited penetration of the Western Hemisphere by a European military power. That's the end. Chapter 11. Wow. Spicy stuff. What do you think about that? While I have a sip. Move the microphone a little bit so I can see your chats. So Frank, you were ahead of the curve there when you said, I wonder if Mandel House was a closet Fabian. He popped up. I wonder if we'll see more of him in chapters as we go forward. A World of My Own, good evening, says the Woodrow Wilson book is available from Project Gutenberg, ebook of The New Freedom by Woodrow Wilson. Mindhack, good evening, says, man, you're really cranking these out. Yep, 3 nights a week, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 7 p.m. UK time until we finish the book. That's the plan. Oh, but I got to miss next Saturday. So, that's a birthday. I can't get out of it. Dr. Crispy Rothschild, hello, I haven't seen you for a while. Welcome. Louis Brandeis came from a Sabbatian Frankist family. That is good catch. Well done. Louis Brandeis. I don't think I'm pronouncing his name properly, but thank you for letting us know. Rose Martin didn't mention that in the book. Probably because she wanted to get it published. A World of My Own says Winston Churchill was an American best-selling novelist of the early 20th century. Okay. Wow. So we're learning lots of new things tonight. That chapter was quite a humdinger. I feel like I should go back and mark that one up. Oh, Chris Jansen's here. Good evening, sir. I'm doing very well. I hope you're doing well too. Lovely to have you in the chat and tuning in. So that last chapter, we're learning now about how they got the professors on board, and this is how it gets into a society, right? Because think, like I mentioned about the tax. Okay, so this tax was deemed unconstitutional twice, and then it was eventually quietly put through, to fund the war, while people were all paying attention to something else. And since then, it's grown into this monstrous slice of your income that if you fail to pay it, you get, a boot on your neck or put in a jail cell or fined obscene amounts of money. Whereas we know the people at the top of the pyramid, they're dodging it. They're dodging paying these taxes, and they've got loopholes, and the whole system is designed in such a way that if you're over a certain level of income, then you can just pay your way out of having to pay these things, right? You can find the loopholes. You can hire the high-level accountants and solicitors and lawyers who know the way to work these systems. But there's always loopholes and backdoors built in for those with enough connections and wealth and power, right? But that is the Fabian socialist way. It's introduce it. It's only it's only a tiny bit of your income, and we need it because we're out. And you don't want to be, you don't want to be speaking German, do you? So you better let us take this little bit of money so we can fund the war over there. And then look at where it's got to now. However, 100 years later, thereabouts. Same thing with university, right? So here we were learning that the professors were being brought into this socialist way of thinking. And then the professors, obviously, they teach the students, and the students come out of university indoctrinated with the worldview, the values, and the systems of their professors. And look at how many people go to university now. It's kind of a given that most young people, like I went to university, but looking back, the main reason I went was because everybody went, and everyone around me seemed to talk as though that was the obvious, inevitable thing to do. And it was just natural. And I never really had any serious conversations with anybody who sat me down and just sort of said, look, this is what it means. You're going to spend all this time. You're going to be in debt. Do you really need this degree? I think people probably did try and have that conversation with me. But when everyone around you, all your friends, all your teachers, you're spending 50 hours a week at school and at college, they're all talking as though university is the next thing to do and the obvious thing to do, and they walk you through that application, and it's going to take a lot of strength of character to not go along with that at a young age, I think. And I think they know this. And so nowadays, the Fabian socialism, the gradual tiptoe has got to the point where most young people will just go through and go out to uni. And the net effect of that is a bunch of young people who just exist in this extended adolescence. And adolescence now is extended well into people's 20s. And that is an absolute catastrophe. People are not growing up and maturing. There's no rite of passage for them to pass into adulthood. So you just have these adults who are the age of adults, but they're still sort of psychologically childlike and immature because of university. But that also fits into the socialism, the Fabian socialist system, because what the Fabian socialists want is a nation of people who are totally dependent upon a bureaucracy, a bureaucratic state, centrally run, bureaucracy. So it's in their interest to keep everybody kind of dumbed down and docile so that they'll choose the handout that the government is giving rather than become independent, become autonomous, start a business, buy some land, grow your own food, and become truly self-sufficient and independent of these systems. So you can see how they're really coming at this from all these different angles. They've got these mechanisms in place that are ready to take over the American government, as we just read. I think that was Woodrow Wilson's admission. There's these mechanisms in place ready to take over the American government that were largely financial, JP Morgan being one that was mentioned. But then they're also coming in the education system, the indoctrination system. They're also coming in there as well and educating young people to make them feel like they're owed something. that like they should be given the world owes them, and they don't have to work for it, they don't have to earn it, and they don't have to upskill themselves and become competent and excellent and operate with integrity and come up with something of value to offer other people and to create more than they consume. None of this stuff. It's just sort of like, well, you need to just stand there and basically be an Oliver Twist. Please, sir, can I have some more? And that justifies then the existence of a high taxation, bloated bureaucratic class of people who are basically just parasiting off everyone else, right? So that was my take on that chapter, and I thought that was an epic, very useful, wonderful chapter. I'll be going back and making notes. So Gwen says, the New Freedom by Woodrow Wilson looks quite easy to get hold of. And if you just joined us, make sure you catch up on the replay, the quotes from Woodrow Wilson's book, The New Freedom, because they're pretty shocking. CESP says, it's funny how Switzerland is a neutral country. Yeah, it is funny that, isn't it? Why could that possibly be, I wonder? Gwen says, Winston Churchill did write novels, but she didn't get very far into reading them. So maybe they weren't particularly well written or interesting, or maybe it was just all propaganda or something. Give me a second, I'm going to blow my nose. Okay. Seti says, thank you so much. I'm not sure who you're thanking, but on behalf of whoever it is that you're thanking, you're very welcome. All right, we got chapter 12. Let's do this. Carrying on learning a bit more about Woodrow Wilson. Oh, and I will say as well, I did mention this on the other stream, but this is a book that I got this week, To End All Wars, Woodrow Wilson and the Quest for a New World Order by Thomas J. Nock. And the funny thing about this was, this is a course text. You can see there, it's a course text. So it's an ex-library book. It's a course text. Where from? Where is the course that this place is using this as a text? It's the LSE. It's the London School of Economics. Is using this book as part of, or was using this book as part of its core text. So this is a really good artifact and kind of shows you that they get a different education than we get. They get a totally different set of information about the way things are, the way things work, and what their role is. You know, the kind of people who go to the LSE, they're the ones who are being trained and groomed and taught to run this parasitic bureaucracy that is taxing the rest of us to death. That's what they are prepared for. They're kind of coached to inhabit those high-level bureaucratic roles where you don't actually do anything or produce anything or create any value or do anything useful that is productive and helps people. You're just part of the machinery, and you are trained through courses at LSE to never question it, to never dismantle it, to uphold it, to believe in it, and to spread that belief, because you're going to make a good living doing it and your life will be comfortable and happy and relaxed and so on. So I thought it was very funny and quite a bit of coincidence that this book turned up, secondhand book, and it came direct to us from the library of the LSE itself. So I think that is a sign that we are hot on the trail and heading in the right direction, or heading in the light direction, as Richard Groves likes to say in the autonomy community. Okay. Oh, and just a clarification there. Gwen says this was a different Winston Churchill who wrote novels. Okay, so you had a Winston Churchill who was the warmonger Prime Minister of UK, national hero, but had a dark side as well to things that he did and he was into. And but there was also another Winston Churchill who wrote novels over in America. So how about that? So be careful when you're buying Winston Churchill books. Sedes has been doing a bit of gardening, so he's going to catch up on the replay. And then Frank Lennon says house is up in the next chapter, so you must have been scanning ahead while I was showing it on the screen here. So good man. Let's get into it. 12. The Perfect Friendship. 1. By far the most influential of Woodrow Wilson's advisors, who always disclaimed responsibility, however, for any errors in Mexican policy, was a grey, neat, quiet, almost wraith-like little man with luminous blue eyes and receding chin, Edward M. House of Texas. He held the honorary title of colonel, conferred on him by Governor Hogg, one of 2 Texas, quote, reform governors he had propelled into office. In disgust, House gave the gold-braided uniform and regalia that went with the title to his Negro coachman, preferring to be addressed simply as Mr. He was a potent but anonymous figure in Democratic Party councils and knew politics from the grassroots up. His support, pre-convention strategy, and adroit instructions to floor lieutenants ensured Wilson's nomination at Baltimore in 1912. So confident was House about the outcome that he felt no need to watch the proceedings and sailed for Europe the day the convention opened. Without this help, Wilson could not have been nominated, nor without the Texas delegation and its resounding 40 votes for Woodrow Wilson of New Jersey, repeated throughout 46 ballots. Since 1902, the very year Woodrow Wilson became president of conservative and Presbyterian Princeton University, House had waited patiently for this moment. He was looking for a fail-proof candidate to replace William Jennings Bryan, perennial Democratic candidate for the presidency. A brilliant orator and great commoner, thundered against the trusts, quote, the interests and the gold standard, and deified labor and the common man. Bryan held audiences spellbound, but he could not win elections and would not stop running. What House wanted was a candidate who might be trusted to carry out a program fully as radical but more systematic than Bryan's, quietly and without alarming the public. A Southerner, born and bred, who had migrated to the north and captured the governorship of an important industrial state, Woodrow Wilson seemed the ideal candidate. In fact, almost too good to be true. He was a respected scholar who had been exposed since 1885 to Fabian's socialist views on economics and the social sciences. He was a specialist in American history and constitutional law who wanted to see the Constitution revised. And to top it all, he was a perfect model of decorum and school-masterly rectitude. From Sidney Mays, the brother-in-law whom House elevated by political leverage to the presidency of the University of Texas, and from other professorial friends, House heard about the battles waged by Dr. Wilson at Princeton in the interests of academic liberalism. During what he sometimes referred to as his twilight years from 1902 to 1911, House made a point of cultivating key persons in the academic world. Even President Charles W. Eliot of Harvard was numbered among his friends. As one who had failed to meet the entrance requirements at Yale and barely squeezed through a few years at Cornell, it gave House a good deal of quiet satisfaction to move among the academic mandarins, and even be able, through his political connections, to name the heads of certain city and state universities. At a later date, he arranged to have his brother-in-law made president of the City College of New York, where Mises instituted a regime of hospitality towards radical professors and students. From afar, House watched Wilson's progress as governor of New Jersey, previously a Republican stronghold, where the former professor was being educated for still higher things. When the two men finally met in 1911, through publisher Walter Hines Page of World's Work, afterwards ambassador to England, an immediate bond of sympathy was established. It was the beginning of what Woodrow Wilson called the perfect friendship, one of the strangest friendships in American political history. Of his second meeting with Wilson, House said, quote, "It was remarkable. We found ourselves in agreement upon practically every one of the issues of the day. I never met a man whose thoughts ran so identically with mine." And a few weeks later, when Woodrow Wilson again visited him, House could not resist saying as his caller rose to go, quote, "Governor, isn't it strange that two men who never knew each other before should think so much alike?" Wilson answered, My dear fellow, we have known each other all our lives. Edward M. House has been described by another friend who actually did know him for more than 25 years as being highly conventional in the social sense and, quote, highly radical, more than liberal in the politico-social sense. House believed the United States Constitution, creation of 18th century minds, was, quote, not only outmoded but grotesque and ought to be scrapped or rewritten. And the footnotes for these points all come from the same book, which is Arthur D. Howden Smith's book, Mr. House of Texas. That's a 1940 book. As a practical politician, he realized this could not be done all at once, given the existing state of popular education. So he favored gradual changes which, in the long run, would produce the same results. A similar point of view was expressed in Woodrow Wilson's campaign speeches, afterwards printed as The New Freedom. Previously, it had been voiced by both American and British Fabians. Perhaps the voters who read or heard Wilson's speeches at the time dismissed the point as mere campaign oratory, but it was one of those basic issues on which Wilson and House found themselves in full agreement, having reached identical conclusions by alternate routes. As a man who never held an official position, though for nearly 7 years he was to wield extraordinary power, the Texas colonel was technically free to subscribe to any ideas he chose. One cannot help wondering, however, by what superior intellectual process President Wilson was able to reconcile such convictions with the oath he took on March 4, 1913, to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. The political and social credo of Colonel House, in which Wilson so warmly concurred, was unveiled in fictional form shortly after the presidential election. Late in the fall of 1912, there appeared a curious novel entitled Philip Drew, Administrator. It was published by B.W. Hubsch, a favorite publisher of the left, and for many years a valued collaborator of American Fabian socialist groups. Though the book was anonymous, some people surmised that House was the author, and he confessed as much to intimates. The colonel had written the first draft in December 1911 while in Austin, Texas, recovering from an illness. Its radical ideas attracted a degree of attention unwarranted by the book's literary merits, or lack of them. Philip Drew was a young West Pointer who led an armed rebellion against a tyrannical and reactionary government in Washington, subservient to the privileged interests. He became the ruler of America, and by a series of executive decrees proceeded to remold the mechanics of administration, revise the judiciary, reshape the laws affecting labor and capital, revamp the nation's military forces, and arrange to set up an international body or League of Nations. More specifically, the administrator appointed a board of economists to work out a tariff law leading to, quote, the abolition of the theory of protection as a government policy. He also instructed the board to work out a graduated income tax. Philip Drew further called for a new banking law affording a flexible currency bottomed largely on commercial assets, and proposed to make corporations, quote, share with the government and states a certain part of their earnings. The former foreshadowed the Federal Reserve Bank, the latter the corporation income tax. Labor, said Drew, should, quote, no longer be classed as an inert commodity to be bought and sold according to the law of supply and demand. The government would give employment to all who needed it. Drew, quote, prepared an old age pension law and also a laborer's insurance law, and provided for certain reforms, quote, in the study and practice of medicine. Finally, he, quote, incorporated in the franchise law the right of labor to have one representative on the boards of corporations and to share a certain percent of the earnings above wages after a reasonable percent upon the capital had been earned, end quote. In return, labor was to submit all grievances to compulsory arbitration. When the newly installed Democratic administration announced the legislative program it wished enacted, House's novel aroused even more pointed comments. cabinet members remarked on the similarity between Drew's program and the legislation requested over the years by Woodrow Wilson. Quote, "All that book has said should be comes about," wrote Franklin K. Lane, Wilson's Secretary of the Interior, in 1918 to a personal friend. "The president comes to Philip Drew in the end." Among the junior officials who read the novel and took it to heart was a handsome young assistant secretary of the Navy. His name was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and his doting mother, Sarah Delano Roosevelt, was then and always a close friend of Colonel House. The Texas colonel was the first important Democrat to support Roosevelt's nomination for the presidency in 1932. Whether House presented a copy of Philip Drew Administrator to the Dowager Mrs. Roosevelt or to her son, its contents unquestionably played a part in the political education of still another American president. It even recommended, quote, fireside chats. Few works of fiction have so deeply affected, for better or worse, the trends of contemporary life in the United States. In effect, Philip Drew Administrator became a kind of handbook or cook's guide for Democratic presidents who proceeded to throw away the old book of presidential protocol, spelling out the chief executive's relation to the Congress, the judiciary, and the military. Those tried and true precepts had been honored by every American president, irrespective of party, until Woodrow Wilson and, whatever the personal inadequacies of the incumbent, had served to hold the country together along constitutional lines and preserve it from the dangers noted by de Tocqueville as inherent in any democratic system of government. Strongly opposed to the division of powers prescribed in the Constitution, Edward M. House was one of the first Americans to foresee the possibility of evading constitutional safeguards by executive decree and to perceive the vast power to be derived from control over the mechanics of administration, two lush possibilities further explored by other White House advisors since 1932 on a scale unimagined by Colonel House. In 1963, a chief executive even induced the Congress to convey its traditional and long-cherished tariff-making authority to his office, with hardly a voice throughout the country raised in protest. There was nothing so very mysterious about the source of Woodrow Wilson's radicalism, which he preferred to call liberalism. It developed, and in his case was perhaps deliberately fostered by far-seeing associates, in an academic atmosphere already tinged with socialist thinking, where the, quote, scientific approach to economics and sociology was being extended to history and to the law. From John Stuart Mill, whom Wilson admired, it was not such a far cry to Sidney Webb, who claimed Mill had died a socialist. The real mystery is how a man like Edward M. House, product of the old frontier and the pistol-packing politics of the Southwest, happened to become a vehicle for ideas and programs that were plainly socialist in origin. For some reason, this has never been explained. 2 years younger than Wilson, House was born in Houston, Texas in 1858. Reared in an era of gunplay, Comanche raids, and rule-of-thumb law in the wild Southwest, he was soft-spoken and courteous. But to the end of his life, prided himself on his skill with a pistol. His father, Thomas William House, was an Englishman who had gone to Texas to fight under General Sam Houston and stayed on to make a fortune there. The elder House often remarked that he wanted to raise his sons to know and serve England. Thomas William House acted as an American agent for London banking interests, said by some to be the House of Rothschild, which had invested in Texas rice, cotton, and indigo from 1825. At any rate, he was one of the few residents of a Confederate state to emerge from the Civil War with a handsome personal fortune in cotton, land, and private banking. He gave his seventh son, Edward, the middle name of Mandel, after a Houston merchant who was a family friend. In later years, this gave rise to a rumor that Edward Mandel House, who became a friend and ally of Kuhn, Loeb and Company in New York City, was of Jewish origin, which was not the case. As a small boy, Edward attended school for several years in England. Much of his youth and adult life was spent in the British Isles, which he regularly revisited. Like his well-cut suits and proper boots, the radical views he affected so unobtrusively from early manhood were made to order for him in London. Being his father's son, he was readily accepted into those prosperous middle-class circles that voted traditionally for a Liberal Party which was increasingly penetrated, after the turn of the century, by Fabian socialists. Concerning the period from 1895 to 1911 in Britain, a distinguished European visitor, Professor Francisco J. Nitti of Milan, observed, quote, "Indeed, in no country of the world are the middle classes so much inclined towards socialism as in England, where eminent men of science, dignitaries of the church, and profound thinkers tend more and more towards socialist doctrines." Personally, House preferred the company of authors, playwrights, and professors, of which the British Fabian Society boasted a noteworthy assortment. Among other connections, Edward M. House formed a lasting friendship with the journalist George Lansbury, a lifelong pillar of the Fabian Society, who for some years represented its more outspokenly radical wing inside the Independent Labour Party, and finally became parliamentary leader of the Labour Party. Lansbury's biographer tells how he once persuaded the American soap millionaire Joseph Fels, a member of the London Fabian Society thanks to the prodding of Mrs. Fels, née Rothschild. Aha. Interesting. So that, does anyone know how that's pronounced? N-E-E, which is her, Mrs. Fels's maiden name was Rothschild, right? I'm just not sure how to pronounce that. The footnote to that is Fabian News, March 1905, in an article entitled New Farm Colonies. This refers to Joseph Fels as one of our members. Beatrice Webb, in her diary during May 1904, quoted by Margaret Cole, confirms the fact that both Joseph and Mary Fels belonged to the Fabian Society of London. A descendant, Joseph Fels Barnes, currently on the editorial staff of a New York publishing house, was in Moscow on a Rockefeller Fellowship during 1931-32, where he was warmly received in deference to his family history. There you go. So we'll go back to that. So Joseph Fels to lend £500 sterling to the underground Russian Social Democrats, including Lenin and Trotsky, when they were stranded in England. Okay, Frank lets me know that this is pronounced knee. Good to know. So Joseph Fels, he is in Moscow on a Rockefeller scholarship. He ends up marrying a Rothschild, and then he was persuaded by George Lansbury to lend £500 to underground Russian Social Democrats, including Lenin and Trotsky, when they were stranded in England. So, how about that? What a paragraph that one is. That's probably one worth sticking on, isn't it? But I've run out of stickers. I'll put a card in there instead. I don't have any stickers left. I've got to buy some more stickers. Okay. Though few historians mention it, the medical history of Edward M. House accounts in part for a career that might otherwise seem a marplot's dream. An attack of brain fever in boyhood, followed by a severe sunstroke, had permanently impaired his health. House lived to be nearly 80, but only by taking precautions not to overexert himself. So again, no wonder he was into socialism. His preference for remaining in the shadow of large events he had helped shape was due, in the first instance, to a physical inability to endure strong sunlight or heat. He could never spend a summer in Washington. Passionately interested in politics, domestic and international, House faced the fact as a very young man that he could not hope to withstand the strain and stress of public office. After his father's death, he arranged matters so as to be assured of a regular income of $25,000 a year, an amount he judged suitable to support him comfortably throughout a lifetime of anonymous and unsalaried, quote, public service. A similar notion of socialist, quote, public service, subsidized by capitalist dividends, was popular among leading British Fabians of Victorian and Edwardian days, notably Sidney Webb, and has its modern counterpart in the support received by outstanding Fabian socialists from private foundations in the United States. It is hard to say just when House conceived the bold plan of penetrating America's Democratic Party at the apex and moulding the policies of a sympathetic chief executive in the interests of a socialist program to change the face of America. Whether the idea was his own or inspired by Fabian friends in Britain, every step he took over the years appeared to be directed toward its fulfillment. Though it involved years of obscure political chores and patient waiting, in the end, House came closer to achieving his purpose than England's Fabian socialists were ever able to do within the framework of the Liberal Party. His career was a living example of socialist gradualism at work. And Chris just said in the chat that Mandel House was part vampire. It's another reason why he had to avoid strong sunlight. With the election of Woodrow Wilson, House became a power at home and abroad. From then until their final break at Paris in 1918, the president relied on House, trusted him completely, and never made a move without consulting him. While previous presidents had their confidants, nothing quite like the association between House and Wilson had ever been seen before in America. The understanding between them was based on ideology as well as affection. It was as if they shared a mutual secret not to be divulged to the American people. As Bernard Baruch said, and he had reason to know, quote, "The Colonel's hand was in everything, from cabinet appointments to decisions affecting war and peace. The small apartment Colonel House had rented in an unfashionable block on East 35th Street in New York City became a nerve center of the nation." And just as an experiment, if somebody in the chat feels willing, have a quick look at what $25,000 is in today's money. I'd be interested to see. So what year should we compare it to? I don't know, maybe compare it to like 1910, 1920, something like that. And just see how much of this money that he's living off is worth nowadays. It'd be an interesting one. There was a switchboard with direct telephone lines to the White House and the State War and Navy departments. This is in Colonel House's apartment, and a constant stream of callers. People came to House as they had been doing all his life, because he was too fragile in health to go to them, and this merely enhanced his importance. Even the president visited him incognito, almost as often as the colonel visited the White House. From the time the United States declared war on Germany, the apartment above Colonel House's was occupied by Sir William Wiseman, wartime chief of the British Secret Service in America, whose functions included counter-espionage as well as high politics. Introduced to the president by House, the young and enterprising Sir William had already become a great favourite with Wilson, who naively used him as a personal emissary on various confidential missions to London and Paris. When the war ended, Sir William Wiseman remained in the United States and joined the firm of Kuhn, Loeb and Company. Just after the United States broke diplomatic relations with Germany as a preliminary to declaring war, an episode involving Sir William occurred, which shows the partiality that highly placed American liberals felt for the outbreak of revolution in Russia. In New York City, Leon Trotsky, then employed as an electrician at the Fox Film Studios, was the leader of a Russian revolutionary group with headquarters at 63 West 107th Street. Wiseman was interested in this group principally because its activities were financed by a German-language newspaper in New York known to be receiving funds from German government sources. Following the Kerensky Revolution, Trotsky sailed for Russia with a group of associates on March 27, 1917, via the Norwegian-American line. He was carrying a substantial amount of money. When the vessel stopped at Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canadian authorities picked Trotsky off the ship and held him. From Petrograd, the gentle Social Democrat Kerensky called Woodrow Wilson asking the latter to intervene. Colonel House informed Weizmann of the president's desire that Trotsky be allowed to proceed. Wishing to oblige its new and powerful ally in what did not appear to be a very important matter, London instructed the Canadians to send Trotsky on his way, leaving Sir William Weizmann, who had forwarded the president's request, technically blameless. So Washington and London innocently furthered the plans of German military intelligence, which at about the same time passed Lenin in a sealed railway car through Germany to Russia, there to assume with Trotsky the leadership of the Bolsheviki. Together, Lenin and Trotsky soon overthrew Kerensky, pulled Russia out of the war, and freed German armies on the Eastern Front to fight Allied troops in the West. The release of Trotsky was a prime instance of the dangerous results of high-level civilian meddling in wartime, as well as a classic demonstration, the first in history, of how socialism opens the door to communism. This remarkable episode has been preserved for posterity by the usually well-informed Sir Arthur Willett, London Times correspondent in Washington, who worked closely with Sir William Weizmann. Willett was distressed by what he called the deplorable tendencies of a good many British lecturers and travellers who roved the United States during the earlier part of the war, quote, saying whatever their politics and prejudices dictated. Conspicuous among them was Mrs. F.W. Pethick Lawrence, distaff member of a well-known British Fabian husband and wife team who waged an energetic peace campaign in America after her own country was at war. Mrs. Pethick Lawrence stayed at Hull House in Chicago, rallying feminists, social workers, and college professors, and receiving the wholehearted backing of Jane Addams and her many socialist friends. Jane Addams, an American Fabian socialist and an eventual Nobel Peace Prize winner, became a world celebrity as a result of her pacifist activities, which continued throughout the war. Even Colonel House had conferred with her before departing for Berlin on his own peace mission, preceding the outbreak of hostilities in 1914. In June 1915, on her way to the Hague Conference as a leading representative of the neutral women, Jane Addams was the admired guest in London of Sidney and Beatrice Webb, who had visited her at Hull House 17 years before. What troubled Willett and other more or less official British observers was the fact that so many of these self-styled peace movements were also fostered by representatives of the German Foreign Office, eager to deter the United States at any cost from joining the war on the side of the Allies. Among the groups supporting Mrs. Pethick Lawrence was the Organization of American Women for Strict Neutrality, founded by a Miss L. N. Miller of Roland Park, Baltimore. Supposedly an independent movement, this organization received monetary and other aid from German government sources and had branches in many American cities. It was reported that the Chicago membership list included Nina Nitz, wife of a University of Chicago professor. Nina Nitz's brother, Paul Hilken of Roland Park, Baltimore, was later discovered to have served as the chief paymaster for German saboteurs in the United States, who, on instructions from the Drittabteilung in Berlin, set off the notorious Black Tom and Kingsland explosions. Her son, Paul Nitz, has risen in our own day to become Secretary of the Navy in the Kennedy and Johnson administrations and a spokesman for civilian as opposed to military defense planning, which only goes to show how neatly World War I memories have been swept under the rug. 2. In March 1916, Sir Arthur we got LJ. So in 1910, $25,000 is equivalent in purchasing power to about $820,000 now. So Colonel House figured, a yearly income of $800,000 will give me a comfortable lifestyle. Thank you for doing that, LJ. 2. In March 1916, Sir Arthur Willett wrote to his editor in London, quote, "We ought to make it impossible for people like blank, 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 or blank to find here the hearing they are refused in England. It is really extraordinary how the country is being penetrated by the wrong sort of Englishmen. I imagine there are plenty of German social democrats who would be only too glad to come over here from Germany and air their views, but they do not come for obvious reasons, and I cannot see why our own precautions should be so patently inferior to those of Germany. As a result of this pointed suggestion, some official steps seem to have been taken. Soon, Willett was pleased to report a, quote, different type of British lecturer and traveller coming to the United States. Among the right sort, he guilelessly listed Emmeline Pankhurst, the suffragist, Granville Barker, the playwright, G.M. Trevelyan, the historian, and S.K. Ratcliffe, author and editor. Ironically enough, they too all belonged to the London Fabian Society, which, like American socialism, was divided on the war issue. S.K. Ratcliffe was a member of the Fabian executive and its chief wartime courier to the United States. He was an editor of the Fabian-controlled New Statesman and became the London representative of the New Republic, a so-called liberal weekly which had been founded in New York in 1913-14 as an opposite number to the New Statesman. Financed by Dorothy Whitney Straight, whose brother was a J.P. Morgan partner, the New Republic was staffed in the beginning by a number of talented, ambitious, and socially acceptable young socialists from Harvard, who dropped the socialist label, but not its program soon after graduation. Among them was the pundit and columnist Walter Lippmann, who had joined the Fabian Society in London in 1909. That name rings a bell, but I'm not sure why. The British Marxist and Fabian Professor Harold J. Lasky, teaching at Harvard from 1915 to 1919, was a frequent wartime contributor, though his articles were discreetly signed HJL, the New Republic. He supported Woodrow Wilson and continued to support him throughout the war, in contrast to its more overtly radical sister weekly, The Nation, which maintained a pacifist and anti-war stand, idolized conscientious objectors like Eugene V. Debs and Scott Nearing, yet did not blanch at bloody revolutions in Russia. Always limited in circulation, the New Republic catered to an intellectual and professional elite rather than to a perfervid, that's a new word for me, perfervid mass of socialist sympathizers in New York City. Apparently, it was in high favor with key personages in the Wilson administration, especially Colonel House, by what Lippmann prudently calls, quote, a certain parallelism of reasoning. The New Republic often suggested policies that President Wilson followed. In those years, the paper enjoyed a kind of mysterious importance which it never quite equaled again, not even under the new frontier. During the winter of 1916, young Lippmann had several interviews, such as any journalist has, with the president, but he denied that his personal relations with Wilson were ever close. Thereafter, Herbert Crowley, senior editor of the New Republic, and Walter Lippmann met about once every fortnight with Colonel House to discuss problems, quote, relating to the management of neutrality prior to the re-election of President Wilson in 1916. With S.K. Ratcliffe commuting from London to attend editorial luncheons at the New Republic, the Fabian circuit was complete. Following the example of top-level British Fabians, New Republic editors moved in good society and were considered eminently respectable. Penetration and permeation were their tasks. Like the Webbs and other worldly, wise leaders of the London Fabian Society, they accepted the war as inevitable and concentrated on planning for the new order, which all good socialists felt sure must emerge from social unrest anticipated after the war. It was no accident that the Fabian socialist Walter Lippmann, while on the staff of the New Republic, was named by Colonel House in 1917 as executive secretary of a confidential group to formulate war aims and post-war policy for President Wilson. There, the famous, or infamous slogan, "Peace without victory," was born, to be revived in a more literal sense many years later during the Korean War. That post-war planning group, dubbed the Inquiry, or Enquiry, was headed by Dr. Sidney Mezes, president of the City College of New York and brother-in-law of Colonel House. on the pretext that any publicity might give rise to rumors that the United States was preparing to accept a negotiated peace. The existence of the group was kept secret. Meetings were held in the New York headquarters of the National Geographic Society at 156th Street and Broadway by courtesy of Dr. Isaiah Bowman, a director of the Geographical Society and longtime president of Johns Hopkins University. According to Lippmann, some 150 college professors and other specialists, who included the Reverend Norman Thomas, later head of the American Socialist Party, were recruited to collect data for eventual use at the peace conference. Since no government funds were provided in those days for such lofty projects, the working expenses of the group were privately paid, presumably by President Wilson himself, although he was not a wealthy man. 8 memoranda. 1 second, let me clear my throat. 8 memoranda, the so-called territorial sections of the 14 points, were prepared by the inquiry. This document, with several additions, was given by the President to Congress and to a waiting world on January the 8th, 1918. One impromptu addition was some kind words uttered by President Wilson about the, quote, sincerity of purpose of the Russian Bolsheviki, though the same might also be said of any forthright thug. While the implications of the 14 points, wrapped as they were in high-flown verbiage, were not generally understood, the document was widely applauded by members of President Wilson's own party in Congress, as well as by progressive Republicans and socialists, and, of course, by the college professors, whose thinking was guided by the new republic. Since then, it has sometimes been said that Walter Lippmann, quote, wrote the 14 points for President Wilson. A claim Lippmann has taken pains to disavow. Obviously, he assisted at the birth in more ways than one. When a clarification of the 14 points was asked by Allied prime ministers in November 1918, 13 of the 14 interpretive sections were written by Walter Lippmann at the request of Colonel House. The 14th, relating to the League of Nations, was written by Frank Cobb, editor of the Pulitzer-owned New York World, where Lippmann was subsequently employed as chief editorial writer. The demands outlined in the 14 points, however, did not originate with Lippmann nor with the inquiry. They were conceived by Sidney Webb and the Fabian Society of London. In December 1917, a statement of war aims prepared by Fabian members of the International Socialist Bureau in London had been laid before a special conference of the British Labour Party and Trades Union Council. Its authors were Camille Huysmans, a Belgian socialist, then Secretary of the International Socialist Bureau, British Fabians Arthur Henderson and Sidney Webb, and the alleged ex-Fabian Ramsay MacDonald. Sidney Webb, whose skill in drafting memoranda has rarely been equalled, did the actual writing. Promptly published as Labour's War Aims, it was the first general statement of British Fabian socialist policy in world affairs and was designed to be copied by socialists in other countries and to establish the primacy of the Fabian Society within the post-war Socialist International. Labour's War Aims antedated the 14 points and included every item covered in the later document. Universal, quote, democracy, an end to imperialism and secret diplomacy, arms limitation, and abolition of profits from armaments, plans for settling such thorny issues as Alsace-Lorraine, Poland and Palestine, and for the self-determination of subject nationalities in the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires, economic controls, and an international commission for reparations and war damage. Moreover, it called for collective security, a supranational authority, an international court of justice, and international legislation on labour and social matters. That is 34. The reference for that last bit is from Margaret Cole's book, The Story of Fabian Socialism. So that is the reference right there. That is a reference for this claim that this document written by the Fabian Socialists called Labour's War Aims calls for international Commission for Reparations, collective security, supranational authority, international court of justice, international legislation, globalism, in other words. So again, people say, oh, there's no plan out there for globalism. You can say, yes, there is. Margaret Cole's book, The Story of Fabian Socialism from 1961, contains the details. In what its Fabian authors fondly hoped might soon be an all socialist world. These were the high-sounding aims which afterwards became the stock in trade of liberal socialist and socialist labour groups in every allied country. Somehow, Woodrow Wilson, the President of the United States, became a mouthpiece for the self-same demands. Walter Lippmann, always gifted at double talk, would doubtless attribute the resemblance to, quote, a certain parallelism of reasoning. It hardly seems necessary, however, to invoke extrasensory perception when such well-placed physical facilities existed for transmitting the original Fabian program verbally and textually to the President. How far Woodrow Wilson was aware of his debt to the British Fabian socialist planners, we may never know. But it seems impossible that the alert, omniscient Colonel House, who shortly before the new year 1918 carried all documentary material relating to the 14 points to the White House, could have failed to be informed of or to connive in the transmission. That view is confirmed by the curious mission on which Ray Stannard Baker, the former muckraker, who became press chief at the Paris Peace Conference, was sent by House in February 1918. Baker was to, quote, report fully for the information of the President and the State Department on the state of radical opinion and organization, especially the attitude of labour in England, and later possibly in France and Italy, end quote. He was given confidential introductions to various left-wing leaders in Great Britain and instructed to send his letters via embassy pouch and his cabled reports in secret code. At House's suggestion that it would be better if Baker were not known to be an agent of the government, he was accredited as a correspondent of the New Republic and the New York World, though he never sent dispatches to either. The first person Baker met in England was Professor Gilbert Murray, an Asquith liberal of long-standing Fabian sympathies. Murray told him that the Asquith faction, opposing Prime Minister Lloyd George, was prepared to accept Wilson's leadership and programme of action, and in this was supported by nearly all of the labour groups, including the Labour Party. The next Englishman he saw was Graham Wallas, one of the original Big Four of the Fabian Society, who had delivered the Lowell Lectures at Harvard and dedicated his book, The Great Society, to young Walter Lippmann. A further list of the persons interviewed by Baker reads like a who's who of the London Fabian Society. G.M. Trevelyan, Arthur Ponsonby, Philip Snowden, H.W. Massingham, George Lansbury, Arthur Henderson, Bertrand Russell, and Mary Agnes Hamilton, to mention only a few. Just going to have a sip. Though he met several lords of the Round Table group, who backed Lloyd George and the Empire, Baker felt they had outlived their time. His real enthusiasm was reserved for the Fabians, although he did not appear to be aware of the existence or function of that discrete socialist society. To him, the Fabians were merely, quote, thoughtful intellectuals and labourites. Finally, at the invitation of the playwright Granville Barker, he lunched with Sidney and Beatrice Webb, and pronounced it one of the great experiences of his life to sit between them and be instructed in the laws of economic affairs. Baker found the Webbs, quote, great admirers of President Wilson and anxious for a better understanding between the, quote, democratic groups of England and the United States. Even now, almost half a century after the fact, it is humiliating for an American to find an emissary of the White House displaying such worshipful admiration for the leaders of a foreign secret society, anxious only to utilize the worldwide prestige of the President of the United States to further their own radical intrigues at home and abroad. Yet Baker's abject performance was praised by House's man in the State Department, the then Councillor Frank Polk. And much later, Wilson himself told Baker, "Your letters at that time helped me." Ray Stannard Baker was the individual finally chosen by Wilson to be his official biographer. As Sidney Webb's honoured guest, Baker was present at the fateful conference of June 1918, when the British Labour Party was formally constituted under Fabian socialist control and adopted Webb's blueprint for chaos, Labour and the New Social Order, as its permanent platform. Baker appraised that managed conference as being quite the most revealing exhibit of British opinion he had yet seen. In a lyric report to Washington, he described the new party as, quote, "the most precious and vital force in British life today," differing sharply with America's wise old Labour chieftain Samuel Gompers, who said the Labour Party in England did not really represent the rank and file of the British working class. The confidential reports sent by Baker were calculated to persuade President Wilson that Labour in Britain as well as on the continent regarded him as a man of supreme vision, called by destiny to unite the forces of true liberalism throughout the world. Slightly reversing the true order of events, Baker assured Wilson that British Labour was not only in sympathy with his, quote, democratic policies, but, quote, indeed had incorporated them in its own statement of war aims. At the same time, Baker's letters warned that, quote, Mr. Wilson can never hope for wholehearted support upon the reconstructive side of his programme from those at present in power, either here or in France. Thus the ground was prepared for the peace conference, even before the bloodshed had ended, and seeds of personal prejudice were planted in the President's mind against the Allied statesmen representing old-line liberal parties with whom he would be obliged to deal. Such advice from a trusted source naturally tended to strengthen Wilson in his determination to hold out for unconditional acceptance of the 14 points as a basis for peace, and to insist that the League of Nations be considered an integral part of any peace treaty. The first American version of a convention for a league was drafted by the President's friend Colonel House on July the 13th and 14th, 1918, in his summer home at Magnolia, Massachusetts, with the aid of Professor David H. Miller of the Inquiry Group. Colonel House did not undertake this task until after he received a copy of the British government's draft plan, which was forwarded to him unread by the President. It was by no means the first plan for a supranational authority purporting to be a preventive against war that had come to the Colonel's attention. Fully 3 years earlier, the Fabian Research Department in London, then shepherded by Beatrice Webb, had prepared 2 reports of its own on the subject, together with a project by a Fabian committee for an international authority along socialist lines. Bearing the signature of Leonard Woolf, it was printed in 1915 as a special supplement of the New Statesman and hailed with rapture by Herbert Crowley's New Republic. Under the title International Government, this Fabian socialist document was published the following year by Brentanos in New York. The draft so speedily produced by Colonel House on 2 summer days in Massachusetts bore a striking resemblance to the Fabian proposals, whose socialist authors were not otherwise in a position to impose their ideas on the British Foreign Office. House's 23 articles formed the basis for the President's tentative draft, which adopted all but 5 of those articles and became the first official American plan for a League of Nations. Eventually, the so-called Wilson Plan was incorporated with a revised British government version for presentation to the League of Nations Commission at the Paris Peace Conference. From such motley materials, the Covenant of the League was stitched together, and yet, when it was finally completed, Woodrow Wilson considered it so peculiarly his own that he was willing to invite personal and political defeat, to sacrifice the fortunes of his party and his own far from robust health, rather than allow a single line of it to be changed. To a practical politician like Colonel House, who had long since learned, as Sidney Webb also had, the necessity for graceful compromise when no better recourse offered, Wilson's attitude must have seemed fantastic as well as suicidal. The perfect friendship of Woodrow Wilson and Edward M. House ended as abruptly as it began. All the world knows that the break between the two men, predicted annually for 7 years by newsmen, occurred at the peace conference in Paris. No two historians agree on the reasons, and the principals have never divulged them. Certain facts, however, are evident. Public sentiment in America had turned against the president and his internationalist views. In November 1918, he lost the Congress, and with it any hope of securing rubber stamp approval for the Treaty of the League. House attributed this in part to Wilson's own indiscretion. For Wilson, House had lost his political magic. In December 1918, Woodrow Wilson went to the peace conference in Paris, a defeated man too unfamiliar with defeat to recognize it. Such authority as he enjoyed was derived from popular acclaim in Europe and was largely ceremonial. Though hailed as a savior by millions, his power was strictly limited. He was a president nearing the end of his second term who had forfeited his support at home, and every politician in the world knew it. While he might persuade, he could not command. Shrewdly, House had advised Wilson to make no more than a brief appearance and a few speeches in Europe and return to pull strings from the White House. The colonel also recommended sending a bipartisan committee of Congress to the peace conference, but their relationship had already changed. Wilson no longer listened to anything so unflattering as common sense. As Sir William Wiseman cynically remarked, the president was drawn to Paris as a debutante is entranced by the prospect of her first ball. In those days, it was a generally accepted fact that the treaty-making power of the United States resided not merely in the president, but in the president with 2/3 of the Senate present and voting. The Constitution said so, and as yet no techniques had been devised by faceless bureaucrats or executive aides for diverting or assigning that power or preempting it piecemeal. Philip Drew administrator was not yet in the saddle. Yalta and Tehran were still undreamed of, and nobody in America except a handful of socialist intellectuals and foreign-born radicals wanted any part of international government. So Wilson, the bitter ender, went home to failure and collapse, while House, the gradualist who never stopped trying, remained in Paris, attempting to salvage by negotiation whatever fragments of his program could still be saved. As it had been from the beginning, their real quarrel was still with the Constitution, and on that rock they foundered separately. The first attempt by Fabian socialists to penetrate and permeate the executive branch of the United States government failed in the end, but they would try again, and go on trying, until Fortress America was leveled, or until their own long-range subversion was definitely exposed. Colonel House was only one man, where a multitude was needed. He had set the pattern and outlined goals for the future, and he still had a scheme or two in mind. In particular, he foresaw it would be necessary for the Fabians to develop a top-level Anglo-American planning group in the field of foreign relations, which could secretly influence policy on the one hand and gradually, quote, educate public opinion on the other. His experience in Paris had shown him that it must be a bipartisan group. To the ambitious young Fabians, British and American, who had flocked to the peace conference as economists and junior officials, it soon became evident that a new world order was not about to be produced at Paris. Most of the younger men in whom House placed his hopes for the future of liberalism and a positive foreign policy in America had already departed. Walter Lippmann, Felix Frankfurter, and above all, young Franklin D. Roosevelt. The few American intellectuals still remaining in Paris, who clustered around Professor James T. Shotwell, were young men of still undefined political affiliations and excellent social standing, such as John Foster and Allen Dulles, nephews of Wilson's Secretary of State, Robert Lansing. Christian Herter, Tasker Bliss, the political general who did not get along well with Pershing. For them, Colonel House arranged a dinner meeting at the Hotel Majestic on May the 19th, 1919, together with a select group of Fabian certified Englishmen, notably Arnold Toynbee, R.H. Tawney, and John Maynard Keynes. All were equally disillusioned, for various reasons, by the consequences of the peace. They made a gentleman's agreement to set up an organization with branches in England and America, quote, to facilitate the scientific study of international questions. As a result, two potent and closely related opinion-making bodies were founded, which only began to reach their full growth in the 1940s, coincident with the formation of the Fabian International Bureau. The English branch was called the Royal Institute of International Affairs. The American branch, first known as the Institute of International Affairs, was reorganized in 1921 as the Council on Foreign Relations. Edward M. House, the lifelong radical whose name was listed in the New York Social Register, in his quiet way, had set the wave of the future in motion. Da da da. Woohoo! Boy, oh boy. Frank, you got it. You called it. Well, you called, yeah, not Trilateral Commission, but you called CFR. The Royal Institute for International Affairs and the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations. Okay, I gotta take a sip. Gripping, exciting, invigorating, and exhilarating stuff. I think that is incredible. We talked a little bit about Colonel House in the Lusitania book by Colin Simpson, which was an incredible read. The quality on that on those videos is not quite as good because I was doing it from Vietnam, but that's on the playlist tab on the YouTube channel if you want to check that out. So we're seeing the same sort of names pop up, and that's more info on Colonel House, who I know is a key player in all of this, but I didn't realize how key. So we've got the British Fabians drafting the plans that would be taken to the peace conference, where the League of Nations was proposed and knocked back because the American public were like, no, we don't want any internationalism, thank you very much. But so they needed another war, and they had to give it another go. But to see the organization and the development and the narrative of it being a small group, and House is sympathetic because he's English. I didn't know House was English, or at least he was brought up here and he had an English parent. And then the connections there with Robert Lansing and his nephews, John and Alan Dulles, who go on to be incredibly important figures in the world of espionage and internationalism. This is just incredible stuff. I'm enjoying it immensely. Quick review of the old chats here. Walter Lippmann, yes. Yeah, that name popped up. It'd be good to really check who he was. Political commentator, American writer and reporter. 60 years his career spanned. That's thank LJ, let us know that, so cheers. CESP looked up the word perfervid. Says it's extremely or extravagantly eager, impassioned, or zealous. Is it perfervid, or perfervid? I'm going to have to look that one up. Frank Lennon says, strikes me Wilson was ideologically spoon-fed right through his presidency. Yeah, I think you might be right there. LJ says, never heard that word before. Love learning would make a good Scrabble word. Yeah. CSP says it describes me improving my reading. Well, that's what it's all about, isn't it? And this is why I think reading old books in particular is so good, because, she's writing these long, complex sentences that I struggle to get my mouth around sometimes, and to read with the flow of the sentence, because people in the past, they just had, before television, social media, and character limits and texting, and they just had a better grasp of language. They could string ideas together, and people could focus for longer and hold multiple ideas and threads of narrative in their minds to a better degree than we can nowadays. We've had our attention span so atrophied. So I like reading these older books because improves our vocabulary, it improves our grammar, and it improves our ability to speak and to put together narratives and ideas and explain things, which feeds into persuasion or what's the rhetoric step of the trivium: grammar, logic, and rhetoric. So describing things to other people, telling stories, being persuasive, maybe debating, maybe having discussions or disagreements, or negotiating, or bargaining, reasoning. All of these things are built on your ability to put words together and communicate them to other people, and that ability is improved and uplifted when we read books, and that's what we're doing here. So it's good to know that we're all improving in that way together. LJ says, I think Keir Starmer is in the Trilateral Commission. Oh, is he a sir now? Oh, that's a shame. I didn't know that. I found a picture of him, though, which I put in the new video. Maybe I'll be able to find it here for you quickly. And by new video, I mean the new short video that I did recently. What I did was, and I didn't find this picture on purpose, it just showed up when I was putting this video together. I was looking for a picture of, future, talking about how they plan going into the future. And I found this picture, which I'm just going to put up on screen now. Look at that. So if you didn't know this, there he is. Trilateral Commission, Sir Keir Starmer speaking at the Fabian Society. So I don't know the context. I don't know what he was there for, what the speech consisted of, what he said, what the dates was. I don't know any of that because I just found this picture totally by accident when I was finding images to put into that new video. But I thought it was quite synchronistic and telling. And it'd be good to know more details about this visit and what was said and what he was invited there for. But we know what he was invited there for, wasn't he? To carry on ruining our lives, because that's his job. All right. So CS Mali 369 was in the chat on Rumble. Good evening to you. Hope you're doing well and enjoyed the stream. And ESP, you're over on Odyssey and YouTube. Look at you multitasking. Appreciate it very much. So, another gripping chapter, I think you will agree. What a book. What a book. I get so excited at the prospect of the contents of all these books that I have. And I haven't read most of them, be perfectly frank and honest. That's why I wanted to start building up this channel, because we've got so much reading and learning to do ahead of us. But there's something magical about reading. When you read a book, like when I have a book, let's take, for example, let's say this one, for example, this Thomas Knock one, To End All Wars. I haven't read this yet. So to me right now, this is just a book. I like it. It's a good hardback. It's extra interesting because it's got the LSE stamps in it. So it's from the London School of Economics. But right now, it's not super special to me because I have no idea what's in it. And I don't know what information's in there. Excuse me a moment. Or I'll give you another example. Here. This one. This little paperback, it's kind of moldy. It's from the 70s. What was it, 1972? And it smells a bit damp. And I hadn't read this one. But as you go through a book and you read it and you get to know the contents and you get to experience the journey and the revelations contained within, like it to me, it almost physically transforms the object. So now this isn't no longer just like a stinky paperback from 1972, because I know the story, and it's on the channel. This is the book I was referencing, because I know the story and the heart-wrenching accounts in here of the day of the sinking, and the injustice, which was carried out through the deliberate bungling of the investigation into the event, the lives that were lost, the harrowing accounts, the ups and downs, the question marks, the big question marks all over it, and the connections with people such as House, such as JP Morgan, such as Churchill. It now has a totally new, special, like, feeling to. I'm really struggling to put into words what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is, like, before you've read a book and after you've read a book, something happens that transforms the book in between those two states. And now that I know what's in here, it's extra precious and special to me. And I can tell, and I can recall, that experience of reading it and some of the things that are in there, and I can go back to it, and it's like, it gives me a totally different sensation and idea and feeling when I pick it up and look at it, right? So that was a very badly explained description of what's happening for me with this book now. Like the more we get through it, the more you read, the more of the story that it uncovers, the more I feel like just so grateful and glad to have it and have a copy here to refer to and to look at and to learn from. 2 copies actually, because I found another one that was pretty cheap. So it's having a very powerful effect going through this, because I'm realizing how how juicy this information really is, and how detailed and how well referenced and well written, that it's just a joy and a real privilege to be able to have this and read it and share it with you guys. So I hope you enjoyed those 2 chapters tonight. Okay, so I think that is going to be about it for this stream. Amanda says, thank you for edumacating me. You're very welcome. It's good to get learnified together, isn't it? So quick final check of the other chats. Yeah, not much going on in those. So I think we can pretty much call it an evening and wrap it up. So thank you all once again. This is week 2. We've finished week 2. We're about a third of the way through the book, I would say. Maybe a little bit over. And this is a real tour de force. So big thanks to everyone who's participating in the chat, people who are catching up on the replays. If you can't get here live, no problem. I'm super grateful for you to tune in on the replays as well. Don't forget that I'm building a mailing list should these channels ever get deleted or nuked for whatever reason. I'm building up a mailing list and asking people to send me an email. And if you tell me mailing list in the subject line, I'll send you a free gift, which is a bundle of my original acoustic guitar music. And then we can just stay in touch for future developments of Haze reviews, and just in case the lights ever get put out on YouTube. CSP just remind us to go out and look in the night sky, because there is some crazy light show stuff going on. So don't forget about that if you're in a part of the world that gets to see that. It's been a clear day today, so I think we probably have a good chance of seeing some fancy lights tonight. And if anyone can dig up an explanation of what's going on and why that's happening, I would be happy to hear that, because is it man-made? Is it something? Is it good? Is it bad? What does it mean? I don't know. So let me know. Shoot me an email if you can. Ways to support the show. It's all underneath in the description box. All my links takes you to all my links where you can share out anything that looks useful or interesting. Don't forget, I've been putting short clips on the YouTube channel and the Rumble and the Odyssey. They're good for sharing and sending out to people if you think they would benefit from the learning that we're doing here and the reading, but they are unlikely to click on a 2-hour video or a 3-hour video. Send them a little 1, 2 minute, 10-minute clip, see if they're into it, and they might jump on board and join us. And the more people we have, the faster and the more expedited our learning can be, and the more fun it is for everybody, I think. So enjoy the rest of your Saturday evening. Have a wonderful and blessed Sunday tomorrow. Take it easy on Monday. Monday blues, it hits everyone, don't worry about it, just ride it. And then I will see you all again on Tuesday. Just again, massive, deep thank you to everyone who's getting involved and participating. It really does make me very, very happy. And we have got a lot of books to get through. So we'll be doing this for a very long time, hopefully. And if we get that core group of people who are really, interested in learning and reading, then we can build it into something very special. So I will shut up now. Take it easy, everyone. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And God bless.
saying about